Over the course of history, there have been some elaborate scammers and con men. For example, there was Frank Nude, a convicted felon who spent his late teens and his early 20s scamming and defrauding people in 12 countries out of millions of dollars by impersonating a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer. Then there were others like Elizabeth Holmes, the Stanford dropout who became known as the youngest and richest self-made billionaire in the world after developing a $9 billion health tech company called Theranos, only for it to come out that she had misled her investors with a bag of lies for years. What these sorts of people may have in common is that nothing would ever satisfy their need for more, and that is what caused the downfall of a man whose youth left him with an unquenchable desire for wealth. How did this brilliant banker pull off such a devious yet audacious scheme where he deceived someone to buy an airport that never even existed? Let's take a look at Emmanuel Nude, the man who sold a fake airport for $242 million. Who sells a fake airport? The answer to that question is Frank Nude, a man born at some point in the 1950s in pre-independence Lagos, Nigeria. Much isn't known about Nude's origins. However, the only thing that is apparent in the man's upbringing is that Nude was of humble beginnings. As such, from a very young age, Nude had a burning desire to emerge from the poverty that plagued him and his family. Thankfully, he had the wit and intelligence to back this aspiration to gain the wealth he craved. Soon, he decided to focus his talents in the world of finance because he believed that this was the best route out of poverty. Coupling his burning drive with his fierce intelligence, Nude found himself as a budding young man in the world of banking and finance. Before long, he found himself sitting as a director of Union Bank of Nigeria, one of the oldest and most prestigious banks of that time. Now winning at life, Nude could have been content with achieving his dream of gaining wealth, but this would not be the case. No, he wanted more, and he wanted a lot of it. No, now he wanted wealth and power, and now the only way he felt he could achieve it was to get more wealth, and it didn't matter where it came from. All he had to do was come up with a plan to make it big, and as he devised his devious plot, he may have had no idea that he was about to pull off one of the most daring financial schemes of all time. Planning the scam. Some may say that Nude was a bit of a genius because he was able to take advantage of the times in his country. You see, the 90s was a time of change and transition for Nigeria, as it was during the latter years of the decade that Nigeria transitioned from military dictatorship to a democratic country. And as such, it had plans to change its capital territory from the city of Lagos to its new city named Abuja. With such plans came a demand for the execution of large-scale infrastructure projects. As such, you can see how it would be a priority for those planning the city to complete the construction of a world-class international airport. To Nude, this was the perfect opportunity for his scheme. To make the millions he was so desperate to make, he was going to sell a fake airport to some unassuming victim. After devising this fraudulent scheme, Nude realized that he couldn't do this alone, so he decided to bring in 5 other bankers into the fore. With their skills and connection in the financial sector, they were prepared to impersonate high-ranking banking officials in the country. As soon as everybody was up to speed, Nude and his band of thieves decided that it was time to set their trap. The trap. Simply put, the trap involved the transmission of detailed faxes to banks all over the world, telling them that a high-ranking banking official in the form of a worker in the Financial Planning and Budget Department of the Nigerian Ministry of Aviation named Tourista William. This fake person declared Nigeria's intention to build a world-class airport in Nigeria. After they set their traps in every corner of the world, all they had to do was wait until somebody fell for their bait. This unfortunate schmo was Nelson Sakaguchi, a director of Banco Noroeste, one of the major banks in Brazil. Excited to have found what he believed to be a new investment opportunity, Nelson contacted Nude to see if they could agree on an investment deal. Now that somebody had fallen for their bait, Nude and his team saw that this was the perfect time to take things up a notch. While impersonating Paul Oguma, the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Nude was able to use such clout to convince Nelson that this was a legitimate deal and that the project must remain confidential. After agreeing to meet in London, Nude and his team prepared for the meeting by stealing the identities of some of the high-ranking banking officials in the nation. Once they had prepared the fake blueprints and other documents they would use to seal the deal, they set out to London so that they could enter the next phase of their scheme. Pulling the scam off in London. Once they were in London, they sold the scam to Nelson by sending a limo to pick him up from the airport so that they could take him to the 5-star hotel they had booked for him. Once the parties met, Nelson was like putty in their hands as they not only managed to convince him to keep the project confidential, he also managed to convince Nelson to start transferring the money as soon as possible by offering him a $10 million commission if he's able to give them $242 million. With this incentive, the deal was sealed, and between the years of 1995 to 1998, Nelson actually sent the $242 million to his scammers. Insane. Hoping to evade detection, Nude and his team were smart enough not to be classy with their plunder. Rather than doing that, they invested most of the money in stock and real estate all over the world. Indeed, it seemed like Nude picked his team well. To keep Nelson docile, they kept sending fake updates in the form of fabricated documents which said they had acquired this material or achieved that milestone. Indeed, it did seem as though they had actually pulled this off. Unfortunately, this victory would only be short-lived. The fallout. The whole house of cards came falling down when another director at Banco Noroeste named Jaime Lopez became frustrated in 1998 because he couldn't account for a good chunk of the bank's capital. We all know where it went, but Jaime Lopez was scrambling around to find his money because the bank was being acquired by one of the largest banks in Spain. After performing a thorough audit of the bank's accounts, all clues pointed to one person, Mr. Nelson Sakaguchi. It doesn't take a genius to guess that Nelson crumbled like a sack of beans when he was confronted about the missing money. Enraged, the board embarked on recovering the money that was so large it was actually the third largest banking fraud scheme in history. Soon, the investigation took the gates of Nude and his goons. Unfortunately for them, they were out of luck when they confronted Nude for their money because Nude had bribed the nation's high-ranking banking officials so that they could protect him from the consequences of his crimes. While this held Banco Noroeste for some time, this didn't last for long because the West African nation soon succumbed to the pressures of the international community. However, the team managed to remain free because of the weak anti-fraud laws that were being implemented in the country. For some time, the only person that felt the full force of the law was Nelson Sakaguchi, who was thrown into the slammer for several years. However, you cannot blame the board of the bank for still being enraged despite Nelson's incarceration. It would come as no surprise that this was because they hadn't been able to retrieve their stolen money, especially because a good chunk of it was hidden well in real estate, so it seemed like their money was lost forever. Fortunately, things were going to change following the turn of the century. Upon appointing their first democratically elected president, President Olusegun Olufemi Obasanjo, Nigeria sought to upgrade its anti-financial crimes measures by setting up the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in 2002. Once this commission was set up, they did not rest until they had Nude and his goons behind bars in 2004, one of which was only able to escape the cold bars of prison, but only because he couldn't escape the even colder grasps of death. It is even believed that he may have been assassinated by the team. Nobody knows for sure. Once he was apprehended, Nude tried to bribe everybody with his stolen money, but when this didn't work, Nude tried to escape by calling in a fake bomb threat, but ultimately this failed. This made Nude realize that the jig may be up, so he tried to negotiate a deal where he'd return some of the money. After some negotiation, Nude was forced to return about $120 million after Nelson Sakaguchi testified against him. Following another $10 million fine, Nude was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his fraudulent crimes. While some may think this would be the end of this crook, Nude was still able to pull another trick by bribing his way into spending only 2 years in prison. Following his release, you'd think that the now convicted man would slip away into something of a quiet life, but his greed saw him facing a charge of murder in 2015 when it was believed that he was responsible for multiple deaths and situations of unrest when a land dispute he was having with a neighboring town resulted in the death of police officers. Incredibly, as of today, he's still waiting for his sentencing. But we all know that he may just be up to another scheme to escape his predicament. It's a shame he couldn't remain satisfied as the director of Union Bank because, who knows, maybe he would have lived a comfortable life free of these troubles. Well, I guess that's what you get for being greedy. With that, this video has come to an end. Want to hear about another great scammer? Why don't you watch our video on Charles Ponzi, the man behind the Ponzi scheme? Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Until next time, take care.